Okay, so I'm gonna do Hug Your White Friends Part 2, and I think that I I appreciate all of the comments and all of the questions that presented itself from Hug Your White Friends Part 1. And the educator in me feels really inspired to fill in some of the gaps that I think I left behind inadvertently with the first video. And that's because I didn't plan the first video. The first video was a response to what I saw happening in real time. So this video is a little bit more intentional, and it might even have a different tone because it's more intentional. Because again, like I said, I don't want to leave things out that I inadvertently left out with Hug Your Right Friends, the first one. I'm talking about this like it's a serial situation. So I want to talk about being at the nail shop the other day. I shouldn't have outed myself like that. I couldn't take my eyebrows anymore, and so that's a whole nother thing. But while I was at the nail shop the other day, one of the women asked and inquired if I had seen the video of George Floyd being murdered, and I said yes. And this was one of the women who worked at the salon, and she is not a black person. And I'm bringing that up to say that it felt very hard. And I'm going to tell you why that felt hard. Because I think she was in earnest, right? I think she honestly saw a black person, saw an opportunity to talk about something that she was really upset about. Okay? And she talked about something that I think it was safe for her to assume that I would know about and I would care about, right? So none of those are bad things. But she's also not a black person. And I'm going to go ahead and tell you that navigating conversations about race, about black trauma, about black lives, about racism, about institutional violence, it's really a measured thing when that person isn't black. It can be measured when that person is a black person, because it's important to make note of that all black people aren't safe with all black people. And that's not today's conversation. But it was hard because she wanted to engage me, and I honestly didn't want to engage her. And so what ends up happening is while I'm at the nail salon, she moves on and she starts to work with another customer, and the other customer happens to be white. So I should tell you that the salon employee that I'm talking about is someone I think is of Vietnam descent. All right. So a white woman comes in and she starts talking to the white woman about George Floyd and the video and the protesting that's happening around the country. And she kept saying, it's crazy. I can't believe this is happening. And the white woman is like, yeah, it's so crazy. And I mean, it's just so horrible that the officer did that, right? And I'm listening to them, having a very human moment. And all I want to do is will them to stop. I want them to stop talking about it, because I feel like to a certain extent, they wanted me to see them have that conversation. And that might not have been true, but that's what it felt like. It felt like they wanted me to see them perform the rhetoric of concern and care. And it seemed like it was an invitation. And that is where I want to start today's conversation, because I think if you are human right now and you are seeing what's happening around the country, this is hard. It's hard to see someone get murdered in front of you. It is hard to see people, whether they look like you or they don't look like you, struggle and be maimed and experience violence. All of that is anti-human, right? And I think that when you're trying to understand that, having someone that you believe will understand that and having a conversation about that seems really important. But in that moment in the nail shop where I was inadvertently being invited to have this conversation with women who didn't look like me, I just wanted them to stop talking. Because let me tell you, every time I talk about race in this country, rather I'm talking about this like race in the classroom, rather I talk about race at a meeting or a Bible study, that conversation always feels hard. And I'm going to tell you a couple reasons why. One is because I've never been invited, formally or informally, to talk about why my life mattered until 2-3 years ago. That conversation is hard because a lot of the times people who are not black don't recognize that they're putting the onus on black people to bear the burden of racism. What do you think about it? Did you see the video? Isn't this devastating? Those are all good questions to ask. But when you are having that question with a black person and you're not black, you have to be really thoughtful about what are you doing to the black person in that moment. And a lot of the times you are asking us, whether you recognize it or not, to one, concede that you're not like the racist who killed George Floyd. 2, that you're not like the racist who killed Tamar Rice. 3, that you're not like the racist who killed Sandra Bland. There's a pattern here. You don't recognize that you're asking for that, but you are. You're asking for an out. You're asking to be called one of the good ones. And a lot of the times, black people will do that because we've been structured and socialized to do that. We have been taught on so many occasions to make people who are not black, so that's not just white people, but to make people who are not black feel good about consciously or sometimes unconsciously supporting white supremacy. So as you move forward in the days to come, and hopefully in the days to come, you decided that you are going to take ownership as a non-black person to do the work to end structural violence, to do the work to end anti-blackness. That's great. But I need you to be intentional about how you invite black people into that conversation. Are you placing the onus on us to help you manage your hurt and anger? And if that's what's happening, that's not fair. All right? So, if you're in a public space and you're having this conversation, be mindful of black people around, because it feels like a subtle invitation and it puts some pressure on us to be a part of the conversation with you, whether we want to be or not. The second thing that I wanted to talk about in terms of hugging your white friends, I needed to put a strategy in place. And what I mean is, go to other white people for support in managing your fears. Go to other white people in support for managing your anxieties. Go to other white people as you try to question and also unpack the inherent racism and anti-blacknism that lives in your life. All of those things are great. But do not go to other white people to learn about racism. I'm going to say that 2 more times. Do not go to other white people to learn about racism. Do not go to other white people to learn about racism. And I'm going to tell you why I'm saying that. There are plenty of white people who have done the work. All right? I can give you names. And I want to be clear because I want to make sure I give credit to where credit is due. But most often than not, most of the white people that you try to talk to about racism have not done the work and you will only end up replicating really horrible ideologies. Okay? So I'm going to say that again. There are white people who've done the work and are doing the work to understand what institutionalized violence is against black and brown people. They exist. It's not a unicorn, y'all. Okay? I'm lucky to know several of them. But they are exceptional in the sense that most white people do not understand how racism works. And so, my suggestion to you is hug your white friends and lean into black people to understand anti-blackness. Hug your white friends and lean into black and brown people to understand racism. All right? And I also want to make this clear. When I say lean in, right, I'm saying get resourced by black and brown people, right? Do not require them to teach you anything, because that's an unfair ask. And in the United States and much of the Western world, people of African descent have already done too much unpaid labor. Don't ask us to keep doing it. Do not. What I mean is, there are so many amazing black women who are doing this work. There are so many black amazing women that I know who write books, who have blogs, who are doing Facebook Lives. You know what I'm saying? Like, lean into them for resourcing, right? Support them for resourcing, but do not try to learn about racism from other white people, period. It just doesn't function well. And I'm going to tell you why it's bad to get these lessons from white people about race and power. Most white people will inadvertently teach you bad things about race. Here are some examples. Oh, I don't see race, I just see people. That's like number one bad thing to teach people about racism. When you tell me, a black woman, that you don't see race, what you are saying is you don't see me. Because every day when I look in the mirror, one of the first things I see is that I'm black. And I love being black. And what blackness to me means is strength and creativity. I mean, I don't want to get confused. I don't want to start the list of the things that I love about my blackness. But I need people to know that that is harmful to say to a black person. Oh, when I see you, I don't see race. That's a lie. It's a lie. So those are the kind of things, and the list goes on, that white people teach other white people about racism and race. And because those lessons keep being relearned, that's why George Floyd was murdered. It's one of the major reasons, because the way that y'all have been talking to each other about racism is problematic. So don't try to learn about racism from other white people. Trust black voices. And part of the reason why I'm going to tell you to trust black voices, other than the fact that this is our lived experience every day, and I've never said this out loud, I'm going to say it today. Black people can't be racist, and I'm going to break that down right now. Okay? So what I'm telling you is, don't talk to white people who are inadvertently racist about racism, because what they're going to do is teach you more racism, whether they're conscious of it or not. All right? And lean into... If we're talking about racism, lean into black and brown people. If we're talking about anti-blackness, lean into black people. All right? Because that's our lived experience. And I'm going to go ahead and break down why you need to trust black voices when it comes to white supremacy and anti-blackness. Is because it's something that we've had to live with our whole damn lives. Imagine if somebody was a mechanic, and at the age of 2, someone handed them, I'm going to make up something, a Phillips screwdriver. That's a real thing. I don't know if mechanics use that or not. They have a tool. They've used it so much. They know how to describe it. They know how it feels in their hand. They could probably find one in the dark. That's black people and racism, y'all. We can see it. We can touch it. It's intangible. It is tangible. It's almost like this second, it's like this sixth sense that we have. And I want to go back to something I said when I said that black people can't be racist. Because I know for a lot of people that is a debate. It's a hot button topic. It's something you've seen over and over again. And so I just want to make this clear. Racism and prejudice are not the same thing. And it's time that we learn how to understand the difference. I'm going to give you this for free. Prejudice is like an attitude based off of stereotypes. So if I believe that all blondes are dumb, then I might say, oh, I'm not going to hang out with blonde women because they're all dumb and I'm so smart. All right. So that's me having an attitude, a negative attitude about white women, based off a stereotype that all blondes are dumb. I conflated the white women blondes together. I'm sorry, Karens. So what I'm saying is, prejudice is about an attitude, and most of the time it's a negative attitude. And a lot of the time, prejudice is about stereotypes. But racism is always institutional, and it's always about institutional power. It's always about policy. It's always about procedure. It's always going to be about social structures. And black people don't have access to any of that shit. Black people did not write the Constitution. Ironically, we did build the buildings that house people who did that work, but that's a separate conversation. We don't have the institutional power, y'all. And without institutional power, we cannot be racist. So that goes back to my initial premise is, why are y'all looking to learn about racism from people who inherently can't teach you about racism? It doesn't make sense. So now that I've helped you understand that you have to get resourced about racism from black and brown people, that you have to get resourced from black people about anti-blackness, do the work to get that support from your white friends, and then do the work to be resourced from people who directly experience these challenges every day. Initially the teacher in me wanted to give you all definitions of institutional racism, but I'm not going to do that because of Google. But I'm going to take a little bit of time here to talk about what anti-blackness is, because that is what we're seeing. It is a huge component of why George Floyd is dead. It's not just because of institutional racism, which are those practices, the structure that creates policy that helps policing occur. And I also think now is a great opportunity to learn about the history of policing if you don't know about what it is. Policing in this country will never be safe for black and brown people. And for the most part, it will never be safe for poor people, because the police in essence exist to regulate those groups of entities. Specifically in the North, policing started heavily because of the ways in which rich white men wanted to protect their property and gains. And in the South specifically, it became about policing the ways in which black people, the enslaved, needed to be kept in check for rich white landowners. So policing is always going to be dangerous. Please stop spreading the lie that it's just a few bad apples. It's the whole structure of policing that needs to go. Policing is dangerous if you're poor, black, or brown, and that's just the reality of it. And you cannot rebuild something that's always been broken. I really feel like I have to say that a few times too. You cannot rebuild something that's always been broken. Policing will never be good in the United States because it was never created to be good for various amounts of people. Anti-blackness is the belief that people of African descent are not human and therefore deserve to be extinct. And I know that's hard to hear. I know that's not something people talk about. I know that the idea that anyone would ever be taught consciously or unconsciously just to look at me and not think I'm human seems wrong. But I just need you all to process that from the very beginning of so many of the structures of the West, black bodies and black lives have always been treated disposably. We see this with COVID-19, with the insistence on having essential workers back into the workforce, when we know that most of those essential workers are black bodies, right? Black people with stories and lives that are constantly being minimized. I think now is the time to move past fear. Lots of white people are angry and afraid, and that reminds you that we have a shared humanity. But I want to challenge you to not live in that. I think it's possible that lots of white people are grieving the American experiment, which is what I hinted at with Hug Your White Friends Part 1. And grief is necessary when a dream has died. You all should grieve that, but move through it. Move through the anger, move through the betrayal, right? Get to acceptance. And when you get to that, the work can begin. And when you're ready to get to that, resource up with Black folks. That's it. Stay well.